Fight!
Yo, we're back with another devlog for Astro. In this video, we're going to make the animation system and add a new movement mechanic. So let's get into it. So last devlog, I created this custom skeleton that would serve as the base for all the characters in the game. I figured that the next logical step would be to make animations for this skeleton, but let me tell you about my development process, if you can even call it that. So every month or so, I make one of these, and I truly believe that this will be the first time that I get organized. But as soon as I touch the IDE, I just work on whatever I really want to work on. My organization ends up looking like this, but I still get a lot of work done, so whatever. I wasted a lot of time in the first week trying to convert my movement transitions into motion warping. See, motion warping is a feature in Unreal Engine that dynamically moves the character to a target point using root motion. I was a bit skeptic at first, but then I saw this.
I assume this information is replicated just fine.
We've done some tests, it's worked.
Let me tell you that this is not the case. Motion warping is fine under 0 ping, but when you get up there with ping and loss, it kind of goes to crap. The main problem is that the internal workings are very opaque, so there's not really a way for me to increase its net tolerance. Thanks a lot, Aaron. Next, I spent about another week making a brand new transition system, and I also implemented a new movement mechanic, the push. So the main theme of Astro is exploring movement in zero gravity, and I really want the controls to have fluidity and juice. My requirement for movement is pretty straightforward. I want as few movement mechanics as possible, while still giving the player many ways to traverse an area with no right answer. I also want the mechanics to be really intuitive. I want players to just be able to pick up the controls and know what's going to happen. I also want animations to be really quick and relatively out of the way, so that players feel like they always have control. On top of this, I want each mechanic to have a very high skill ceiling and be interconnected with the other mechanics. This could mean that two mechanics are actually linked in the code, or they just flow nicely one after the other. The base velocity in Astro is very low, but there's also relatively no friction. This means that each push and slide will keep adding to your velocity so that you can chain together moves like combos in a fighter game. With more mechanics, the connectedness of the movement system will feel even better. In the end, I want there to be many diverse move styles, which will allow for more player expression in what is typically the most basic system of a game. The last major requirement is to reduce camera rotation as much as possible, especially roll. See, when the camera gets rotated a lot, this can be really nauseating for some people, and I really don't want that to be a barrier to experiencing zero gravity. This is an uphill battle, since one of the basic inputs, which is the Z and C keys, roll the player left and right. I've tried to slow these down and put them on an exponential curve, which I think minimizes the seasickness feeling while still giving the player the controls they need. This problem is especially hard for me because after playtesting my game so much, I'm pretty much immune to any camera movement, and so it's not really easy for me to tell what's going to make other people feel nauseous. So coming back to the push, it was not a straight path of design or development. I knew I wanted a mechanic that could make the player push off a surface because this would complement the slide nicely, since the slide moves you parallel to a surface and the push would move you perpendicular. At first, I was exclusively thinking the player would have to look straight at the wall and then push off of it backwards. This is really intuitive, but it came at the big expense of being nauseating. Getting very close to a surface in first person causes things to move very quickly, and you can easily lose your focus. On top of this, I found through watching gameplay for myself and other playtesters that everyone tries to align their look direction with their velocity. It's just natural to want to look where you're going. But this means that to use the push effectively, you always need to do a 180 out of it. And again, this makes for a nauseous experience. So my first experiment was to try to make the player go third person. This was interesting because it allowed me to use some of the tools from my new animation system. My idea was that by going third person, the camera would be much farther from the wall, so you wouldn't lose focus, and I can also rotate the camera more slowly through the entire transition of the push. That way there isn't a 180-degree snap out of it. It also has the added effect of letting you see your skin, which normally doesn't happen in first-player games. In reality, however, the third person didn't work out so great. It felt a little stiff, and being brought out and back into your character so quickly was kind of jarring. Also, even when I made the third person and first person move durations exactly identical, the third person push just felt way longer and more cumbersome because it seemed like you were watching a mini cutscene instead of playing the game, and this violated my idea of keeping the user always in control. Next, I went back to the first person push, but I tried to rotate the camera for the player. I was really proud of this animation I made, since it does feel really cool. I think I got a good sense of capturing the inertia of the player's body moving into and out of the wall. Ultimately, however, it was still nauseating to look at, and I could only make it better by slowing it down. Make it too slow, and now the player is stuck without control of their character for a long time. That's when I finally converged on the side push. I think this is a good example of why it's often better to keep it simple. The side push is fast, it barely moves the camera at all, it keeps the player relatively facing their velocity, and it still does the job of moving the player off the wall. Internally, I'm fixing the outgoing velocity to be at a 45-degree angle from the wall, so that the player still keeps their forward momentum. This mechanic is also super net tolerant, and with my new transition system, here you can see that I'm testing at 10% packet loss with a ping of 300, and these are insane conditions and would be unplayable in most games, but my push is still holding up relatively well, and I'm not even using any reliable RPCs here. This is purely compressed flags, so there's very minimal bandwidth usage. Now that I have the second mechanic, I want to create some connected moves between the slide and the push. I think it's a good start to allow the player to push while sliding, which will launch them out of the slide with an upward velocity or something like that. I'm still in the process of designing these connections, and I haven't done any implementation yet, but I'm open to other suggestions on ways that I could combine the two mechanics. I've been iterating on movement in Astro ever since V1, and a part of me wishes that I could have spent less time on that and fleshed out the game more, but I'm really satisfied by how far the movement has come, and it's only getting better, so it was worth the investment. After getting the push in a good spot mechanically, I re-implemented the slide for the umpteenth time. I'm not sure if this made it better than before, but I'm sprawling out the player more and putting them on their back, and then having the camera rotate forward. This keeps the camera closer to the surface, which I feel like adds a bit of extra immersion because you really feel like you're up against the wall. After the mechanics were done, I added animations to them, and I really wanted to use the slide as a place to try my new animation system, particularly my camera control bones. See, I have one bone that acts as the camera target, and this allows me to move the location and the base rotation of the camera by animation. Then I have a second bone that's called the camera additive bone, and this means that, similar to root motion, I can record delta rotations from the bone and then feed these as inputs into my orientation component. So basically, I can add look inputs from an animation. You can see where this might be useful in things like recoil. In the slide, I introduced this by transitioning the camera smoothly to the surface, and I also add some roll to the base rotation when the player is leaning left and right. Then I started fleshing out my animation blueprint more. I created a solid C++ foundation for my blueprints and defined a good interface between them and the rest of the code base. Then I integrated this with my weapon system, and I used linked anim layers to allow weapons to override poses in my state machine. There were many bugs along the way, and I had one problem where the right hand was about 3 centimeters higher than it was meant to be, which took me 12 hours to solve. But yeah, things were looking pretty good. Oh yeah, and somewhere in there I was on spring break, so I did not get a lot of work done that week. After that, I raced to tidy up the project and get it into a playable state. This involved a lot of stressful debugging, but the playtest went relatively well with only some minor problems, so progress is forward. I'm also calling it on V3. Map, character, movement, and weapons have all been leveled up, so I'm ready to move on. In V4, I'm going to be adding more guns, movement abilities, and game modes. I also have to do a lot of dev work on the game's systems to prepare for the coming increase in scope. This is going to include stuff like upgrading the input system, making use of modules, laying the foundation of UI, VFX, and audio in C++, creating a runtime state visualizer, implementing online sessions, integrating Unreal's test-driven development tools, and increasing the net tolerance of my core gameplay code. This is the part where my game goes from being a polished prototype to an alpha build. All of these things are going to take a lot of time, and the changes won't be as user-facing, meaning that the game probably won't look that much different, but they're integral to creating a successful game, so you're going to have to be patient with me in this phase. On the bright side, V4 will culminate in Astro being launched on AWS servers for pre-alpha testing. This means you could playtest the game and have an input on its design and direction, so I'm really looking forward to this. I'm also launching a Discord for Astro, so that you guys can give me more feedback and I can post casual but more frequent updates on my progress. So if you're interested, the link's in the description. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for the next devlog. Peace.
Bro, looking mad cute. How do I kill?